I'd like to introduce our speaker, Mike F. from Prescott. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Tiffany. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm Mike. I'm an alcoholic, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share with you this evening. I had to jump off another meeting that we have to join this, and I saw a lot of the people that were on that meeting came over, so I want to welcome them and thank them for following me. You know, I get an opportunity to do a lot of speaking through my AA life. My sobriety date is April 23rd, 1985. And for that, I'm grateful. And I always start that way. And tonight, I think I got distracted. But I do want to say that it was important for me to know my sobriety date. Because when I first came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was 15 years old. And I attended an awful lot of AA meetings at that time. And for the next 10 years, I never was able to put together 30 days of continuous sobriety. And in 1985, when I got sober, and you're going to hear more about that in a few minutes, the sponsor that I had gave me a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said, open that book up, kid. And I did. And he said, now write your name in it and write your sobriety date in it. And I looked at him and I said, why do I do that? And he said, well, if you don't know your sobriety date, then you don't have one. And I want you to know that as a result of that type of instruction and guidance, I've not had to change my sobriety date. And I'm so grateful that John had said that to me. Well, as I was saying, I get an opportunity to do quite a bit of speaking. And, you know, when I'm talking at a conference or a big meeting, it's inevitable that somebody will come up and they'll say, do you get nervous when you talk? And I want you to know that I'm not nervous. And the reason I'm not is because I've got a pretty good idea what I'm going to say. And you have no idea what you're going to hear. So if anyone should be nervous, it should be you and not me. And that's pretty much the way I feel about it when we're given this opportunity. You know, I got sober in Texas. And down in Texas, they used to have the meetings where you would sit in a room and they would go around the meeting, much like we do at many of our meetings today. And, you know, Tom would say, I'm Tom, and I'm an alcoholic, and I haven't found it necessary to have a drink. And then he might give his sobriety date or the length of time. And then Dorothy would say, I'm Dorothy and I'm an alcoholic. And they'd go around, and it got to Ed. And Ed said, my name is Ed, and I haven't found it necessary to have a drink for 14 years, 3 months, 2 weeks, 7 days, and 6 hours. And David looked back at him and said, Ed, that's a damn lie. I saw you Saturday night, and you were so drunk you couldn't get down the street. And Ed looked back at him and said, well, that wasn't necessary. And I want you to know that every drink and everything else I did, in my opinion, was necessary to get me to and keep me in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm grateful. I don't regret the drinking. I've never had a drink of alcohol that I drank for anything other than the effect produced by the alcohol. That was why I drank alcohol. I grew up in an alcoholic home. My dad was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He got sober when I was very young. His sponsor got sober in 1941. His sponsor was on the first International AA Conference Committee held in Cleveland in 1950. He was at our home every day. I had a lot of AA in my experience growing up. It was there all the time. My mother was Al-Anon, very active for many, many years. She died almost 7 years ago next month. And she was just short of 50 years in Al-Anon. My mom used to love to tell stories too. We had 7 kids in our family. And there were always drunks at the house. And the New York State Police, I grew up outside of Buffalo, New York, and the New York State Police would actually drop drunks off at our house and put them to sleep on our front sun porch. And my dad and his sponsor would take them to meetings, and my mother was always cooking meals for the drunks and doing all the things that they did. And I remember that we would come home from school and there would be donuts and cookies and a smoke-filled house. And it just seemed like this was constant state of what was happening in our lives. And I never had a problem with AA. I got to see families restored. I got to see the blessings that the recovery brings to the family because it was being experienced in our family. That's not to say that it was never dysfunctional or there weren't any problems, because there definitely were. Different times, I'm sure my dad had challenges with his recovery and his sobriety and some of his issues that, character defects and so on. There was a lot of dysfunction growing up, even though there was a lot of blessings that we got to see from AA. My mom used to love to tell a story that one day we were getting ready for school and my sister was in the kitchen. And she's my younger sister, so she was probably, 10, 11, something like that. And there was a drunk sitting at the kitchen table drinking his coffee and shaking, and he was just whining. And this guy's just, oh, I feel so bad. I'm so embarrassed. I can't believe this. I've done it again. I'm so ashamed of myself. And he's carrying on. And finally, my little sister looks at him and says, we've seen way worse than you. And I just think sometimes the ego deflation coming from a 10-year-old might be more effective than what it is from some of our sponsorship. But my story is one that I grew up in that home. I saw AA as a positive thing. I saw families getting together. I really believed in it. But somewhere along the line, I started to find out that if I drank, I felt better. And I had a lot of secrets. I remember I would go steal things at the local stores just to do stuff. And my behavior was not the behavior I was learning in my home or at the Catholic school or any of that. But alcohol became part of my journey. And what happened when I started, because my brothers had friends, my older brothers, and in New York, you could buy alcohol at 18. So I would give these guys money and they'd buy me a bottle of MD 2020 or some Boone's Farm wine or a quart of beer or whatever it was. And by the time I was a freshman in high school, it wouldn't have been uncommon to find me sitting in the park drinking by myself, because I didn't have an interest in drinking and hanging out with everyone and partying. I just wanted to drink. I had gotten to a point by then that I just wanted that effect produced. And I have to be honest and tell you that somewhere in that early part of my life, the benefits of the alcohol, the feeling good, the wanting to be social started to slip away. And it was replaced with things we don't generally like to talk about at AA meetings, but a lot of high-powered sedatives and things like that. And I began doing a lot of that stuff early on. So the combination of that and drinking the way that I was drinking landed me in my first detox, and that was at Children's Hospital. And I don't know how many of you have been detoxed in Children's Hospital, but they don't have a detox ward in Children's Hospital. They put me in an intensive care situation. I was there for about 8 days where they were taking me off of the chemicals that I was on and the alcohol. And while I was there, the AA members that were friends of my dad would come and visit. And every day there were AA members coming in to see me. And, they would take me down to they had a little rec room and they'd walk me down there and I'd sneak a cigarette and I'd go back to my room. And, by the time I got out of the hospital, they had encouraged that I should go to counseling and that I should go to AA. I wasn't sure if I qualified for AA because I didn't meet the single requirement, and that was a desire to stop drinking. I just had a desire to not be in trouble. I had a desire to get the heat off me. I had a desire for people to like me. I had a desire to please people, but I don't think that not drinking was a very strong desire when I was 15 years old getting out of the Children's Hospital. I started going to counseling, and I loved that. The counselor and I hit it off great. This is in the 70s. and I would love to get there. I didn't care how long we hung out because we used to smoke weed together. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool. You know, is it Tuesday? I want to go back to counseling. My first AA meeting was pretty much uneventful. It was on a Friday night at 9 o'clock. It was at the bottom of the police station in Orchard Park. It was my dad's home group. It was called the Hillbilly Group. And I knew all the guys and all the ladies from AA because of my them being at our house for all the parties and anniversaries and things that they celebrated. And I remember going down into that police station. They had long wooden tables and low ceilings, and that was back when you could smoke at meetings. And the room was filled with smoke. And they went around the room that night and they introduced themselves. And Bob said he's an alcoholic, and Jim said he's an alcoholic, and Art said he's an alcoholic. And finally it came to me, and I said, I'm Mike, and I'm a problem drinker with alcoholic tendencies. Because I didn't want to be an alcoholic. It was just that simple. And the thing I later discovered was I associated the confession or the admittance of being an alcoholic with one thing. And that was people who said they were alcoholic stopped drinking. I couldn't do that because I didn't have that desire. And as a result, I had selective hearing. So I would sit in these meetings, even though I had the visible proof in my home that Alcoholics Anonymous works and works for all these families. I thought Alcoholics Anonymous was you don't drink and you go to meetings. And then good things happen to you. So I wouldn't drink. As time went on, I would stop drinking and I'd go to meetings and I would sit in the meetings and I would think about all the different ways I could kill myself. Not drinking never fixed me. It always made me worse. 100% of the time. I can tell you I've been in psychiatric hospitals. I remember one time I was getting checked into a psychiatric ward and the young ladies doing the typical intake questions. And as she's asking me the intake question, I was probably 20, 21 at the time. And she's asking me the questions. As she's asking me these intake questions, I'm suggesting to her that a life with me might be a good move on her part. And that was the level of my insanity. Everything I did was about me. Everything I did was for me. I was a taker, and I was always looking at an angle, some way to manipulate things so that you would like me, so that you would hang out, so that you would give me something or bail me out or give me money or give me a place to live or take care of me. I had this victim mentality, and it was self-serving 100% of the time, and I resented what I saw in AA. I would sit in AA meetings, and there would be, 100 people in the room, and there would be one guy that maybe had a wet brain, and I would say, yeah, if you think I want what you've got, look at that. I would find one person, and that's the person I would focus on. And I wouldn't think about the 99. And I think when Bill wrote, let's not look at the ugliness of a tree, let's see the beauty of the forest, I wasn't ready to see that. So I would single out that one person. And as a result of it, I continued this process of getting worse and not getting better. I don't need to tell you all the little gory details of what happened. I will tell you that I graduated high school, which was really an accomplishment. And the reason it was an accomplishment is because I rarely went, okay? And it was a good place to meet people, to distribute different things and collect money. So I would go and do that. And that was about what I did in high school, manipulated my way through. And I graduated. On the day I'm going to the graduation, I stopped at a bar and I had a couple of drinks, and I got to graduation, and this is a big deal, okay? Like they had it in the city of Buffalo, their major auditorium. So there's people from the community and my mom and dad and grandma and family, and they're all there. And it's my turn to walk across the stage and get my diploma. They announce my name, and just as I start walking across the stage and the arena is just quiet, you could hear a pin drop. And one of the guys that knew me in the back, I had different nicknames that people would call me, and this guy yelled out one of my nicknames, "Drugs," as loud as he could. And before I got that diploma in my hand, I knew that I was nothing but a disappointment. And that's how I felt pretty much all of the time. I felt like I couldn't measure up. I couldn't live up to your standards or my parents' standards or my school standards or any of the jobs or any of the things I could do. I couldn't live up to that. And I know today why I couldn't. And the reason I couldn't is because I couldn't live up to my own standards. And that's because I wasn't a guy who woke up in the morning and thought, oh, I want to go out there and piss everybody off and drink and be a disappointment. That was never my mission. My mission was always, I want to be a good son. I want to be a good guy. I want to do good things. I didn't have the power to do that. And because I couldn't live up to my own expectations, I had little chance of living up to anyone else's. So I knew I was nothing more than a disappointment. April 21st, 1985, I broke into a house. And the reason I broke into the house was I was going to commit suicide. It was downtown Buffalo. I knew the people that lived there. I knew he was a hunter. I knew he had guns because I used to live with him. I tore that house apart looking for those guns, and I never found one. I later found out they were gone on a camping trip and had brought their guns for hunting or whatever. Well, I couldn't find, I tore the house apart, and I'm on the top floor of this old city house, and it's beginning to be daylight. Now, I am just having a bad time. I just want to kill myself, and that's all I want to do. And I'm looking out the window, and the sun is just starting to come up, and I see these three ladies walking down the street wearing these funny church hats. And for some reason, I thought of the God of my childhood. Right? You know, I'm looking out the window to see if I dive out, if I'm going to die, or if I'm going to just flop around in pain. And I didn't want any more pain. That was the goal. The goal was to make the pain go away. And I see these three ladies walking down the street, and for some reason I got down on my knees and prayed to the God of my childhood. I don't remember anything fancy in the prayer other than God help me. And nothing really changed. You know, I've done a lot of history stuff and have had an opportunity to write some books and do some cool things in my recovery. And one of the things is I've really studied Bill Wilson's life. And, you know, Bill in the Towns Hospital in December 1934, he said he went into this depression after his sponsor, Ebby, came to see him. And he said, Ebby showed up in the door this morning, and Bill was sober for a couple of days. And Bill invited him in, and he said, Ebby, what's that simple formula that you shared with me a few weeks ago at my home? And Ebby said, Bill, you gotta be licked. You gotta be done. You have to be willing to believe in some power greater than yourself, even if you try it as an experiment. You have to do an inventory of yourself and the things that you've done and things that you've done to others. You have to be willing to do a confession. Then you have to be willing to pay restitution for harms done. And lastly, you have to be willing to carry this message to others. That was a 6-step formula that Ebby communicated to Bill. Bill said Ebby left, and he sunk into the darkest depression he'd ever been in his life. And in the depth of that despair, he cried out as a child, if there's a God, show himself. And he said the whole room lit up a bright white light. And he felt as though he was on a mountaintop, and he could feel the breeze blowing through and through, and he knew he had been released. When I got down on my knees in that room that morning and said a prayer, that didn't happen to me. I actually went on and drank the whole rest of the day. But at the end of that day, I knew there was one person that would answer the phone if I called, and that was my dad. And I picked up the phone and I called him, and he said, where are you? And I told him I didn't know they hadn't seen me in a while. I learned that years later because I thought I was like at their house 2 days before. And my mother said, no, we had no idea where you were. We hadn't seen you in weeks. He came and met me the next day in a diner with another alcoholic, and they did what we call a 12-step call. And we talked about my options, and I didn't have any. I was out of options. I was out of good ideas. I had nowhere else left to go. I had no money. I had no job. I was unemployable. I weighed 90 pounds, and I was sick. They made arrangements for me to go to the Erie County Medical Center the next day. And my brother dropped me off in front of the hospital. I had been there before. And I walked in with my normal supplies that you bring when you're going to the hospital. I had a couple of packs of cigarettes and a little paper bag with a toothbrush and whatever. Anyway, I got to the lobby of the hospital, and the admissions counselor came out and greeted me in the lobby, and he put his hands up and he said, "You can't come in here. We can't help you. You've been here too many times. Please leave." I threw my little brown paper bag down on the ground. I walked out, and there was a taxi cab outside. It felt like the gates of hell had closed down on me, and I had nowhere else to go. And I did the same thing that any real alcoholic on here tonight would do, and that was I said to the cab driver, "Take me to a bar." And I didn't care where it was. And he took me to a bar, and I went in and I started drinking. And while I was in that bar drinking, I was thinking about my lot in life, the fact that I don't have the guts to kill myself and I can't get well. I did not know what to do. And I look out the window, I look out the doorway. The door was open and there was a city bus pulled up and an old woman was trying to get on the bus and she fell. I left that drink sitting there and I walked out and I helped that lady get on the bus. I didn't kick her. I didn't take her purse. I didn't run. That was the kind of guy I'd become. But I didn't have to do that. I helped her on the bus and I followed her on. That drink is probably still sitting in that bar and they're probably still waiting for me to go back and get it. And I believe that the message of Alcoholics Anonymous happened for me that moment. And that is this. That's giving of ourselves to the service of others without expectation. I only helped that woman because she needed help. I wasn't looking for anyone to applaud, anyone to give me anything, or anyone to recognize that I had done it. I did it because she needed help. I really believe that that's the message that Ebby brought to Bill. And that was a message of, this is a new kind of giving. In here, we give without expectation of reward. And when we do that, we can get up, stand up, and stay up. Shortly after that, my dad called a friend of his down in Texas. His name was Big John. And John got sober on October 28, 1951. And John was speaking on the circuit. And he did an awful lot of good for Alcoholics Anonymous for the years that he was with us. My dad caught him that night and said, "I've got Mike here and I don't know what to do with him. We've been trying, and we just don't know what to do." And John said, "Send the kid down here for a couple of weeks. We'll see if he wants the deal." He always called AA the deal, always called me the kid. He actually had another name for me, and my sponsor, Howard, asked me not to share that when I'm speaking in a meeting. So I just keep it at kid, okay? I arrived in Brownwood, Texas on May 5th, 1985, and I remember Big John pacing in his room that night. He invited me down for 2 weeks. I did everything alcoholically, guys. I stayed for 2 years. He had a one-bedroom apartment. He gave me the bed. That's sacrifice. That's giving of yourself to the service of others, expecting nothing in return. And you know what? It never dawned on me where he slept, because I was so self-centered that it didn't matter. I got the bed. That was what was important. I think back at how much giving he and others like him did for me. But that night he's pacing. And he says, "Kid, how long you been around the deal?" And with as much ego as you can have, when, as I said, I weighed 90 pounds, everything I owned was in a cardboard box and I'm wearing someone else's pants. I looked at him and said, "Oh, about 10 years. He says, "I don't know if you've got the guts it takes to make it. But if you do, we can show you by living proof how you never have to live this way again. And if you want to get sober, I'll go to hell and back with you. And if you don't, you can go to hell alone. I was waiting for Welcome to Texas. The next thing he said to me, or shortly after that, he said, kid, you're nothing but a thief. You're a thief of the worst kind, because you stole from those you love the most their right to happiness. When he said that to me, I felt that experience that Bill had of that despair, of that darkness, of that loneliness and that emptiness and that failed life that I had. And because John was an alcoholic and he faced me with the truth about myself, it was as though he was able to enter that cave of darkness and grab me by the hand and lead me to the sunlight of the Spirit. And I know today he was able to do that because he was an alcoholic. And he was an alcoholic that had a message that had weight and depth. He knew who I was because he knew who he was. That's the power we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. We can reach people when doctors and scientists and religious people cannot get through. And we can get through to those same people like that if we know our story. And I found that my story was the thing that was important. It was important for me to know that. So I began hanging out with these guys. And John's bringing me to meetings, and we're reading out of the big book. He would travel, and he'd have the kid drive. He'd tell the community, hey, we're not going to fly. The kid's going to drive, and we'll be over. We'd come to Arizona, or we'd go to California, or we'd go to Canada. It didn't matter, okay? The kid was driving, so I became his chauffeur, okay? And I would drive, and he would be reading to me from the 12 and 12, from As Bill Sees It, from AA Comes of Age, and from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then he'd quiz me. Hey, kid, what's Dr. Bob's address? And what happened was I began to learn all of these things because John was giving me an opportunity and sharing this experience with me. And, I look back and I think, I'm a big book guy. Okay, I'm a big book guy because that's where the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is. But I want you to know that I got to the big book because the guys I was around were giving me love and encouragement, and I wanted what they had. And John would say things to me like, hey, kid, could you make me some eggs this morning? Maybe put a little yolk on them? And I'd cook them breakfast, and there'd be stuff flying all over the kitchen. There'd be a mess. The pots and pans would be still sitting there at nighttime. He would brag. Everybody he would see, he would say, this kid cooked me breakfast. He's one of the best cooks I've ever had. And it's funny because John, at one point in time, when my parents met him, he lived in Chandler, Arizona. He had a guest house that was for movie stars. And they would come there and they would get sober. And then but it wasn't a treatment center, it was a guest house. So they had a horse ranch and pool and all these casitas. And John had a cook. So I knew Roy, his cook, from back when I was in high school. I used to go to meetings there. And Roy was this guy was like a professional chef. And now I got John telling everybody that I'm a cook. I'm the best cook he ever had. So he asked me to make him spaghetti and meatballs. And he said, can you make the meatballs round? Well, I grew up in Buffalo. I can make a snowball as good as anybody that's on here tonight. So I went to the store and I got a loaf of bread, a dozen eggs, and a pound of hamburger, and I put it all in a bowl, okay? And I mixed it all together, and I made these balls that looked like snowballs. They were white, because if you put a whole loaf of bread in with a pound of hamburger, it really does look like a snowball. And then I fried it up in the bacon grease that was sitting on the stove from that morning. So I fried that up, and I bought a little can of some kind of sauce, and I threw that, and I threw the meatballs, and I boiled some pasta, and I gave it to him, and he ate it. I got 2 weeks of compliments. Every time he saw, this kid made me the best spaghetti and meatballs I've ever had. Literally, he would stop people in the grocery store. I thought they were strangers. I don't know if they were friends. He'd call them over. I want you to meet the kid. This kid is a cook. He made me the best spaghetti and meatballs. His mother taught him how to cook. And I'm thinking, my mother would slap you in the face if she ever saw what the hell I cooked for you. The reality was, this guy began to give me things that I could do. I was broken. He gave me little things that I could do. He paid attention. Then he acknowledged it and gave me some praise. I want you to know I responded to that. I wanted to be around people like him. That became very important in my recovery. That's what got me into the big book. And I share that because if you're sponsoring people, I hope that you'll find the good in them and bring it out. When you see them do something right, pay attention, applaud, give them some encouragement, give them some love, because I already know that it probably took me 9 months before I began to believe. You know, I would see people and they'd say, Mike, you're doing really good. Yeah, I go to the meeting. You're doing good, Mike. Things are going, you look good and you're doing good. And I liked what you said. When they were done, I would think, they don't know me. They don't know that I'm a dirtbag. They don't know anything about me. They're just saying that because they say it to everybody. I had no idea. I was the last one to know that I was doing good. And yet they kept telling me this. They kept giving me this. They kept giving me this. And finally I began to see it. It was the same thing with prayer. I didn't know how to pray or what to pray to or how to do it. So my prayer, and here's what happened to me in prayer. I used to see my dad, when I would go by his bedroom in the morning, he would be kneeling down saying a prayer. That was how he started his day. So I would kneel down, I would say a prayer, and I didn't know what prayer to say. So the prayer was, God, help me to get through this day without thinking about taking a drink. And you know what? I would go through the day, and at some point in the day, my head would go, boy, a drink would be really good right now. So as far as I was concerned, that wasn't even working, but I kept doing it. One night, I was getting ready for bed. It was probably 3, 4 o'clock in the morning because Big John would stay up all night reading to me and talking to me. We'd be listening to speaker talks and things like that. I was getting ready for bed, and it dawned on me. I went through that whole day, and I never thought about taking a drink. It was the first time. I knew that God was doing for me what I could not do for myself. I saw that the promises of Alcoholics Anonymous began to happen in my life because of the actions that I was taking. I believe that the results are because of what we do, not because of what we say or what we read. It's by what we do. So if we're painstaking about this phase of our development, we're going to know a new freedom, a new happiness. We'll comprehend the word serenity. We'll know peace. No matter how far down we've gone, we'll see how our experience can benefit others. Feelings of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We'll be able to see things differently. That started to happen. You know, it says if we're painstaking, that implies that there's some effort involved. You know, Bill didn't write there, well, if you get to this point, you're going to be moderately satisfied. No, he said, you are going to be amazed before you're halfway through. I think that the words he used, we need to look at. And if you're new, I want you to know that you can be amazed right now because you're doing something that you couldn't do yesterday. And that is you're sober one more day. And that's what this deal's about. We can get up, we can stand up, and we can stay up. I had an attitude where I'm going to get even with those people. Those people that hurt me, I'm going to get even. I can't wait till I get back to Bubba. I'm going to show them I'm going to get even. And I used to say this to John, and finally he got sick of it, and he looks at me and says, kid, you're going to get even with someone. Why don't you try to get even with someone who's been good to you? Well, I recently celebrated 35 years. And I want you to know that my mantra really is, I want to try to get even with these guys that have been good to me, that have given me this experience and this opportunity and the encouragement and the love that I've needed. So I've been blessed, and I've gotten to travel quite a bit. You know, I was leaving Texas, and I said to John, I'm going to go to Arizona. I've got a friend there that's got a construction business, and he's going to let me work for him. He's going to give me a room to stay in. So I came over. So John's like, okay, good, kid. That's great. Go. And I think he was happy to just have me move on. That was the longest 2 weeks of his life. So I got to Arizona, and I started going to meetings, and I'm sponsoring guys, and I'm doing all the things I've been taught, and I'm doing my work, and it's a Saturday, or, you know, I'm off on this particular day, whatever it was, and I'm out at the park, and I go to the pool, and this girl dies in the water. And I took a look at her, and I dove in the water after her. And she said her name, I said, my name is Mike, and I'm an alcoholic, because that was about the extent of my vocabulary at the time. And she says, I'm Joy, and I'm a school teacher. And I thought, wow, I need more joy in my life. And 4 months later, we were married, and we, in December, celebrated 32 years of marriage. We have 3 kids, grandkids, and 1 on the way, and just an absolutely amazing life. I couldn't possibly have scripted it. Some of the greatest people I've ever met have been in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had a sponsor named Howard P. He died little over a year ago. I remember I was having a rough time, and I called Howard. Basically, just to run through it real quick for you, I woke up one morning, I had a concern, okay? And I laid in bed thinking about my concern. It became a problem. Nothing changed. Mike thought about it. Then I thought about my problem for a minute more. It became a crisis. Nothing changed. I thought about it. Thought about my crisis. I became immobilized. Finally, I dragged my butt out of bed. I call Howard, say, I'm coming to meet, pick you up. I take him to Denny's. I give to him my crisis. He looks across the table and he says, your life is in divine order, unfolding into goodness. And I'm thinking, what? Clearly, he didn't understand the magnitude of my crisis. So being a salesperson, I kind of regrouped and gave it to him again at another angle. And he looks back at me and he says, your life is in divine order, unfolding into goodness. Well, that went on one more time. And then finally, I think Howard was pained by the fact that I couldn't comprehend what he was saying. And he gave me these instructions. He said, go back through your life, as far back as you can go. Look at all the circumstances and events that have occurred that led you to this moment right now. And if you're honest about it, you'll see that most of the time that you were afraid, what you were afraid of never happened. Most of the time when you wanted something, you really wanted it really bad and you didn't get it, what you got was better than what you wanted. And if you're honest about it, you'll see that God has pulled a golden thread through each and every one of these circumstances and events that have led you to this moment right now. What I took away from that was this, that I could look at the experience of my own life. I could see the golden thread. And because I knew my life was in divine order, unfolding into goodness, I had nothing to be afraid of. I could see that it was going to be okay. I want you to know that that's been the way I live my life. I'm so grateful for the wisdom of these guys and the patience. So I'm traveling. I speak at a young people's convention in Myrtle Beach. And while I'm there, I'm hosted by a guy who had written the movie, My Name is Bill W., back in the 80s. And he says to me, how about we write a book sometime? And I'm like, okay, that's cool. That's just like, somebody asking me when I play golf. All right, I'm up for it. I'm not any good. I'd never written a book. My God, I barely even graduated high school. About a year later, he calls me and he says, are you still interested? And I said, sure. And he said, what do you want to write the book about? And we talked about it. He said, would it be all right if I talked to the publisher and see if they'd be interested? I said, that would be fine. He talked to the publisher. He calls me back a few days later. Hey, the publisher's interested in us writing the book. I said, great. He says, would it be all right if I had my attorney negotiate the terms of the contract? I say, well, you're doing pretty good so far. Go ahead. So he negotiates the terms of the contract. I get a contract in the mail. I sign it. I send it back. I get a check. I cash it. Because that's what you do with checks. About 2 weeks later, I go to my sponsor and I say, I'm under contract to write this book. I got a check, but I don't know what to do. He did the same thing as I've come to rely on in Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, just start. Just take that first step. It's going to be all right. And I did. And we did that book. And after that book, I get a call from the publisher asking me to write another book, and then another book, and then another book. I do 4 books in 2 years. I'm not an author. How does that happen? My life is unfolding into goodness. I get back from one of my trips. I'm out in the garage. I'm cleaning up. My kids are now teenagers. My youngest is 17. As I'm cleaning the garage, I look behind me, and I see a whole bunch of police officers raiding my house. I find myself at 27 years sober in handcuffs laying on the floor of my own home. They didn't care that I was 27 years sober. They weren't there for me. They were there for him. And they arrested him and took him out. But while I was laying on the floor, the thought comes through my mind. My life is in divine order, unfolding into goodness. The next thought was this. So is his. He just celebrated 8 years sobriety. He's married, has a couple of children, and absolutely is a wonderful example of what this fellowship is all about, of giving of ourselves to the service of others without expectation. Seeing that golden thread in my life is wonderful. Seeing that golden thread in my son's life is beautiful. But I have to tell you, my message tonight is not about me. It's not about my son. It's about you. I hope you'll take the time to do some self-examination, some prayer, and some meditation, and see how God has pulled and is pulling a golden thread through your life. Dr. Bob, our co-founder, at the last talk that he gave to an AA group was made July 1950 at the First International Convention. And in that talk, Dr. Bob said, if you took Alcoholics Anonymous and you simmered it down to just 2 things, those 2 things would be love and service. And I believe today, if we simmered it just a little further, we could get it down to just 1 word. And that 1 word would be love. And the reason I believe that is because service is a physical manifestation of love. That love is the answer. A bell is not a bell until we ring it. A song is not a song until we sing it. Love wasn't put in our hearts to stay. Love is only love when we give it away. AA is only AA when we give it away. Thank you for listening. I love you. Have a great weekend.